Build to rent. You may have heard it mentioned, but most of us don't understand exactly what it is, and certainly even less know how it's going to affect us all as property investors. Well, the good news is, after listening to this episode, you'll know more about build to rent than most people involved in property.
Welcome to the Property Podcast, where every Thursday morning property investors come to be informed and inspired. Thank you for joining us for a really exciting episode, because we are joined by a true expert to talk about one of the most significant trends going on in property right now. That's coming up in just a minute, and make sure you stick around to the end, because in Hub Extra I'm recommending the most inspiring book I've read all year. So for our news story this week, we've picked something out from the website Place Northwest. And this sounds pretty shocking, Rob. Clearly the whole Northwest is being paved over. The headline is Region's Greenbelt shrinks by 3,400 acres.
Yeah, when you read a headline like that, you think, oh no, what is going on? Like, there must be nothing left of the Northwest. And big catchy headlines like that can worry people. It's interesting, actually, while the amount sounds a lot, on the whole, it is a very, very small amount that most people won't notice. Now, the green belt is very important. We're not dismissing that. Having a green belt and having areas that are protected to keep our country looking beautiful is a must. But I think a common misconception amongst people when they read headlines like this is that all green belt is beautiful. A lot of greenbelt is actually land that is far from attractive, and you would think, wow, doing something with that would be a much better use. Greenbelt isn't all forest and beautiful shrubland. There are large parts of the greenbelt that actually probably need to be regenerated in one form or another. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean we need to build on it. We can do other interesting things as well and help that land contribute in other ways by possibly even just planting trees, and government grants can do that. But I think the key point here is when we see headlines like this, we immediately go, oh, that's a shame, and can quite quickly jump to conclusions. But I imagine if we broke down all 3,400 acres, which don't worry, we're not going to, a lot of that, if we had photos of all of that land, we'd go, right, that makes sense. Yeah, okay, I can see why that's been developed on. It's not all going to be areas of outstanding natural beauty. And I think for news stories, we do like to grab headlines that sound quite shocking, but may not be as bad as it seems when you get into the detail. And again, I think this is another case of big, scary headline, but actually, on balance, maybe not as bad as it seems.
Quick reminder before we get into our main topic this week that it's that time again. Meetups are just around the corner. Yes, on the first Thursday of every month, the whole of England and beyond is taken over with Property Hub Meetups, a place where you can go along and chat with other like-minded folk, bore on about property as long as you like, with no one checking their watch, and importantly, not be pitched anything. If you haven't grabbed your ticket yet, do it now. Just go to propertyhub.net/meetups.
So this week on the Property Podcast, we have an expert with us. We have Richard Berridge. Now, Richard is the right man for the job for this particular subject, because build to rent, it's incredible what is happening, but it's really happening under the radar, and it's a relatively newish phenomenon. You know, it's been going for a while, but it's been getting to scale more recently. So Rob and I, while we were impressed by what is happening out there, we wanted to get a real expert in, not just to help you learn, but also ourselves. So Richard was the perfect choice. Yes, because without question, he's an authority figure on this subject, but so much so that he's actually a consultant to build-to-rent companies and an advisor and a writer as well. So we're very lucky to have him in. So the first thing we wanted to ask him is explain to everyone what exactly is build-to-rent.
What is, in the simplest terms, build-to-rent?
Well, in the simplest terms, I guess it's tends to be a block of flats that's purpose-built to rent out. It differs in a sense from a block of flats that's purpose-built to sell, because the ultimate owner is going to keep it. And so there are elements to it that are designed with management in mind of tenants. So if you're looking at something that's got back of house and that sort of stuff around it, and specifically around building performance. So, for instance, I guess if you're building a block of flats to sell it, then you're not massively concerned how much the common parts are going to cost to light, or how they're going to be cleaned, or where the rubbish is going to be. I mean, you are going to have to take some note of that, but when you're actually running a building, the costs of that are obviously a little bit more. So, but fundamentally, it's just a block of flats that is purpose-built to rent out.
And you mentioned the ultimate owner. Who is normally the owner in build-to-rent?
The ultimate owner tends to be funds, and they look at residential investment as something that they've looked at it rather with sort of envious eyes over time, because the buy-to-let market has obviously done really quite well and has grown exponentially over, I suppose, since around 2000. And it's one of the things they never really looked at, because as you know, most institutions do, in terms of their property portfolios, do own blocks of offices, high streets, what's termed sheds or retail parks and that sort of stuff. But they've never really got involved in residential, or at least they not latterly speaking, they were sort of many, many years ago. But they do see that residential is quite an important part of a balanced property portfolio. I've seen, comments by people who sort of invest in buy-to-let that it's something that would likely be short-term, and once they found out how difficult it was, they'd all run away and they'd sell the flats. These guys are in it for the long term. These are pension funds in the most part, and so they have what's called sort of long horizon money. And what that really means is that 30 years would be too soon to be selling. And so for them, it's kind of, they're looking at that growth curve over the next 30 years. They see pretty steady, pretty level sort of income coming through. And when they have that sort of thing, when they have that sort of income coming through, then they can plan for the future and yours and my pensions.
Mm. So are they interested purely in the rental income stream as opposed to the asset growing in value over time?
Well, the asset growing in value over time obviously sort of adds to their sort of assets under management, how much they're worth. But really it's all about income. And that sort of brings me slightly on to another element of built to rent. And I suppose it has two parts. There's the asset itself, which is specifically built to rent. And then there's the management element too. And I support, they go sort of hand in hand in the sense that built to rent couldn't be described as simply an asset. It has also been described in terms of, I suppose, one of a better phrase, customer experience and the way that it is managed. And that, again, that's another thing that's sort of come out of the way that institutions look at their assets. They want them to be profitable and they want them to be performing, and the best way to do that is to ensure that those people who are helping those assets perform, the tenants, are happy, are content, are well looked after.
So who else would be involved in putting a build-to-rent development together and running it? Because if you're a pension fund, you don't have any property management experience, so presumably that part's done by someone else. So as well as the fund who goes, we'd quite like to have this block and this income stream, who else gets involved in making it happen?
Well, the pension funds actually have a bit more experience than you think in terms, especially in terms of asset management. But having said that, it would be a normal development experience. And for instance, once you've decided that you might be interested in a particular site, let's say it's Warrington, for instance, it doesn't matter where it was, but they'll do, a huge amount of work in terms of demographic profiling of Warrington. This is sort of the early stage sort of stuff, in terms of the scheme that they're considering. Is there a sort of quantum of that socioeconomic group that they're targeting, to actually rent their flats? And that's done by sort of consultancy right at the beginning that they'll be working with, and it may well be the same consultancy that does ultimately the basic management functions as well for them. So they'll be doing that. They'll be doing research into the likely rent levels they're likely to achieve. And then beyond that, it's very much around the normal consultants and that you would sort of normally expect to be using, cost consultants and so forth, in terms of estimating how much something's going to cost to build, looking at planning consultants, what are we likely to be able to get on this site. The planning consultants will also be able to sort of tell them, again, going back to Warrington, what Warrington Council are like, what their predilections are, what they're likely to accept, and those sort of things, and how favourable they view build to rent as a product. And then ultimately, they'll pick up maybe pick a developer or contracted to build it for them, or they may have been bought this opportunity by a developer or contractor who sees build to rent as an exit opportunity for them, and they'll sort of go along to any of the institutions, I don't know, L&G and M&G, and as you'd say, as the BBC would say, there are other products available, to see whether this is something that they would buy, and they would then enter into a joint venture. And so it's can be quite complicated. And in doing that sort of joint venture, that the institution will then decide whether to forward fund that scheme, which basically means that they sort of will buy the land and it will get funded as it gets built. And in doing that, they're not going to pay the 3% surcharge. Or whether they're going to take the product as a sort of a golden bricks thing, which is a slightly complicated tax situation in terms of, similarly, you avoid the stamp duty, or whether they just take a finished block. We haven't really got to the stage yet where people are taking existing stabilised physical assets. There's a few of them going around, but there's nothing really there to say, yes, this is trading well.
And this whole sector feels like a recent phenomenon. It's only the last few years that we seem to have been hearing about it a lot in the kind of the mainstream press. Is it recent, or is it just being talked about more?
Well, I guess we could say 2012. I mean, there are people who were looking at it before 2012, but it was the Montague report that really kicked it off in 2012, when he looked at the barriers to institutional investment into residential on behalf of the government. And that really was the point at which people really started to take notice about residential as an investment, as a large-scale investment. So yes, I mean, look, 2012, like 7 years ago, it's not been going long in this country, and you can really tell that, because whilst it's become a bit of a buzz, it's not a massive buzz, you know, BPF, or probably British Property Federation, released figures yesterday, I think it was, maybe the day before, that we're now at, I think it's 148,000 homes, either in planning, completed, or under construction. So, you know, when you think that the general PRS numbers in the UK are arguably, let's say, just for rounded up, 5 million, still represents a tiny proportion. And I suppose it's getting a disproportionate buzz in the press. And a lot of that probably is because some of the promises that the build-to-rent developers and managers and owners have made is very much about improving tenant satisfaction and tenants' lot.
And how much bigger do you think it's going to get? Are there any statistics or indications of where it might be in another 5 or 10 years?
Well, I was trying to think, actually, what the numbers are in terms of current investment. CBRE have done some numbers, and I really can't remember what they are. They're relatively small compared to where we think it might be going. So 2025, for instance, I think Knight Frank have said that it's going to reach the value of about 70 billion. And I think we're way, way below that at the moment. I mean, we're not even into the tens, I don't think, right now. So the idea is that it really will grow. It's difficult to see where all the tenants are going to come from, because, you know, most of what we talk about is theoretical. There is some evidence that buy-to-let investors are moving out of the market because of, you know, various stuff the government is sort of imposing upon them, which has made life a lot more difficult. And there's various sort of indications that people are more accepting of a more flexible lifestyle than owning a home does. I mean, owning a home has always sounded like a really great idea, and I think it's sort of hardwired into our system, and has been since about 1920. Since the government of those days really wanted homes for heroes. Now, obviously, a lot of that at that time was also about sort of social housing as well, and making sure there was enough housing people for soldiers returning from the Great War. But it was also about trying to get people to have a stake in the system. And the Conservative government at the time, a little bit after 2020, decided that the best way for that to happen is for ownership. And it's become ingrained in us ever since then. So moving away from something that's so deeply ingrained in a population's, in a country's psyche, is quite difficult. It's a seismic shift in the way that you start to do things. But owning something can also be quite a big responsibility. And I think most owners would say that. It's great when you have that idea about sort of ownership and sort of moving on, and then you buy something, and then all of a sudden, Christ, I've got I've got to maintain this thing, I've got to insure it, I've got to do all these sort of things, and it's never ending, and sometimes you can have a house, and I got a house, and I sort of get to the weekend and think, I can relax, and the wife says to me, got to do the guttering, we've got to do this, got to cut the grass, you've got to, oh heavens, what is this place falling down around my ears? No, it's just normal maintenance. But with renting, you don't have any of that. I mean, if you want to up sticks and move, or you have a sudden brainstorm, hey, let's go to France, let's do this, let's go and take the kids out of school and so around the world. If you're renting, you just do it. And you have that massive, immense flexibility. And I think that's what I think society is sort of coming to realise. We're very much more about experiences these days than we ever used to be, and also immediacy of experience. Owning something means that you've got to sell it if you really want to upgrade, or rent it, or do something. And then, that does tie you. So I think that in terms of, again, sort of, I suppose it's sort of anecdotal in a sense, but or theoretical, we believe there are more rentals coming to the market. I mean, ownership's now at around 63%, I think it is at the moment, around 63%. Private rental has sort of plateaued over the last year, but that could be for, a number of reasons. I mean, Brexit is sort of, taxing us all right now in just about every way imaginable. So we don't really know what's going to happen. I think we've got to get back to a sort of a stable environment, a legislative environment, before we really know where people are going to go. But it looks like that there is going to be a sort of diminishing in sort of buy-to-let numbers, and which is good in a way, because I think that the people who will stay will be more professional, and I think that the sector will be all the better for it. And you'll get people in who really know what they're doing, are really focused on their assets, are really focused on their tenants and their well-being and so forth. And I think they sort of stay, whereas the sort of accidental people will probably sort of drift away from it as too much like hard work.
Yeah, agreed. Talk a bit about the tenant or the resident experience then, because I think something that makes normal individual buy-to-let investors nervous is they'll see the gyms and the concierges and all the things that you can do on your app and go, gosh, how am I ever going to compete with this? So what are they competing with? What is there kind of like a standard level of service that you tend to see?
Well, you'd think so, wouldn't you, if you listen to some people, that it's sort of standard. But I think it's that, part of that very initial sort of viability study is, where's this bit of land going to be, where is it sitting, and what sits around it? And your thing is, and it's all about what's appropriate. So if for instance you're building a block of flats and right next door you've got a Virgin Active, then it's probably better to do a deal with Virgin Active than to build a block, a big gym into your block of flats. I think fundamentally speaking, I mean, it costs, all that amenity costs money. And that means that that's going to be reflected in the rent. Now, quite often we talk about, if we're sort of talking about basic metrics, we're talking about premium that build-to-rent can achieve. And in a sense, it isn't really a premium. It's just the cost of whatever else is being provided is being on-costed to you. So, for instance, pretty basic would probably be decent broadband throughout, Wi-Fi throughout the building, so you wouldn't have to have a concern about that. You'd certainly probably have a sort of a club room or communal space where you can do some stuff. And you'd have a concierge, and they'd have a back of house, and they'd be looking after parcels for you, and looking after, not by any stretch of the imagination in the same way as a hotel, but some blocks might do that. And that's the sort of fundamental sort of basics thing. And then you find people who also have places where you store your bicycles, and you'll have a bicycle repair space where people would sort of, after you've ridden in your bike from work, you park it in there, and someone might take it from you, and they look it over and make sure it hasn't got punctures and that. And so you can do all that sort of stuff. Possibly a gym in some of them as well. I think gyms are quite popular, especially in the bigger schemes, because then, of course, you've got many more people paying for one single amenity. And really, I mean, amenity and customer experience is all about making people happy. And when people are happy and content, they stay longer. And that's really what it's all about. And we go back then, and when we talk about just making people stay longer, we go back to the ultimate owner, who's the institution. And what's he interested in? He's only interested in long-term, stable income. And any way he can achieve that is demonstrably proven, he'll do it, you know.
And does technology play into this as well in terms of like interacting with your property manager via an app, for example?
Yeah, I mean that's prop tech's a big thing, you know, right the way through the prop, you know, tech industry, and you know some prop tech's really sort of quite useful and valid, and especially around sort of property management sort of stuff, it can be quite useful. But your engagement tools are also quite useful as well, and that can either be an app. Your engagement tool is also your concierge, because don't forget you're going to pass those guys sort of every day, sort of more or less as well. So it's physical as well as sort of, you know, sort of tech-based. But sort of tech-based stuff's great because it gives people the option to contact their management team for any purpose. For instance, I mean, you can have, I mean, there's lots of stuff going on, which is sort of convenient stuff. But let's say, for instance, you know, you're a young guy or girl, and you're like 29 years old, and you've rented a flat with, let's say, TP, for instance, who are Quintain's lot up in Wembley, and you, I'm sorry, I don't quite know whether TP do this, but let's just say they do for example's sake. And let's just say, for instance, you're at work and your mum says, "Oh, my darling, I've decided to come down for the weekend," and you think, all the washings in the sink, oh my God, mother's going to go bonkers. You can call them up and say, right, mum's coming in, can I book a cleaner for like a couple of hours before I get home, blah, blah, blah. You know, and that's the sort of thing that you can sort of start to think about being able to do. Which, of course, your buy-to-let, you know, you couldn't call up your buy-to-let landlord who lives in Shrewsbury and, you know, you rent from him and because you're in Newcastle and say, mum's coming and the cleaner, have you got a cleaner? And he's going to go, "You're bonkers. Are you mad? Go home early and do it yourself. What's wrong with you?"
And there's this drive for service and things like that would almost have been unimaginable a few years ago. You mentioned that comes from America.
It does, yeah. I mean, very much so. I mean, the thing is about America. I mean, I love the place. In parts, I love the place at least. I mean, the thing that you sort of notice about the States is that they're very sort of service orientated and they genuinely mean it. Now the problem with that is to British, UK ears, it always sounds like just a little bit corny. Yeah, have a nice day and that sort of stuff. But Americans genuinely believe that, and they work really, really hard at customer experience. An example of that is, for instance, Cortland, who are a big what they term over there multifamily, and they don't call it build to rent, they call it multifamily in the States, operator in the States there, and they've got about 50 to 60,000 units over there, so it's a big operation. In terms of their management, they like to think that they're great at what they do in terms of the management customer experience. So they don't really make any money out of their management side of their business. They're happy if they break even, because the focus really is on customer experience, so much so that they have a head of customer experience, and actually I need to give it another title, and I can't bring it to mind right now, but that person has come from Disney.
Oh, wow.
To ensure that the experience of every one of their tenants that Cortland has is exemplary, is perfect, is brilliant. And I've never been to Disneyland, but I've heard from quite a lot of people who have been, is that when you go to Disneyland, it's the bizarrest place ever, in the sense that everybody, even people you don't know who are working for Disney, are somehow managing your expectations and making them better everywhere you go. So, you know, and so a lot of what we our initial learning is coming from the States, where the industry is 40 to 50 years old over there. So they have lots more experience than we do over here in terms of not so much the buildings themselves, but the experience element of it.
Can you pull that off in England, where everyone's a bit more grumpy and cynical and doesn't feel quite the same way about service?
Oh yeah, the thing about great service is that we all know it when we're getting it. And we don't go, well, that was corny. We kind of get a nice little warm feeling inside, and it makes us feel better about what's sort of going on. And that can be as easy as having a telephone conversations with your bank, and the person on the other line is really empathetic, really reaching out to you, and genuine. And it's all about that sort of, you know, being genuine. And that can be quite a hard thing to pull off, not only as the person giving service, but also receiving it, because we're always a little bit suspicious as a nation, that somebody's doing something and they're getting something out of it. They wouldn't be this nice to me, you know, normally. What's going on here? So it's quite a long it's a very subtle sort of business, and so it's it's quite hard, and it's very difficult when we're employing people to give great customer service. Where do we take them from? Because if you look at the British various industries and what have you, and even the hospitality industry, which is probably the best at it as it should be, we still have to train people to be that good at giving great customer experiences. So, it's just not. I don't think it's within us to do it. This is it. You're trying to all the time look at ways to make sure that the people that you're dealing with, your customers, are happy and are experiencing and having a great experience in being with you as an owner of a block of flats.
Yeah. Whether or not you're told to have a nice day in a genuine way that works or not, you've still got a level of service that's quite amazing, like the fact you can book a cleaner at no notice or have someone repair your bike potentially, and you've got a level of facilities that in some cases pretty stunning as well.
And you get car sharing and things like that.
And all of that, yeah. So does that mean that, you mentioned that the rents are sort of, there's a premium or perceived premium, but does that mean that build to rent is always going to be feel like the top 10% of...
Yeah, upper decile. I think it'll pretty much always be there. I think, but having said that, the difficulty build to rent had at the beginning is that you have to bear in mind where the property market was at the time. It was competing with house builders who at the time were having no difficulty selling their product, and the prices were rising up. So because rental doesn't work quite in that way, you can't give as much for the land. So a very early sort of entrance into build to rent will probably have given the wrong impression of how the whole industry is, and they are probably going to be slightly premium in terms of their offer. So I mean, some of them got sort of running tracks on the roofs and the whole thing, which is great. But there's a much stronger because the market isn't the same anymore. There's a much stronger effort to bring build to rents much more in line with market rent. They're still going to be towards the upper levels, I think, in many cases. And in terms of, I don't really like to call it a premium because you're not paying for something extra that you're not getting. You tend to be paying for a bit more than something you really are getting. And a lot of that is all about security and those sort of things. Genuine security, not just of your apartment, but also of tenure, because these guys are looking for, the government's talked to us about sort of 3-year tenancies. These guys stay longer. So that's never an issue. You're not all of a sudden going to get turfed out by your landlord because the daughter's going to university nearby and she needs the flat, or you need to release capital, and if you decided you haven't wanted to remortgage because you can't, different environment, and so you're going to sell it and that sort of stuff. These guys go you stay because we don't want you to go, because the longer you stay, the cheaper it is for us to manage. So it's much easier, yeah.
Why is it necessarily for the top 10%? Is there anything stopping developers or institutions from going more mid-market and just cutting out some of the fancy stuff?
Yeah, there is, and I think that's happening as well. So we are going to be starting to see a lot more of the build-to-rent stuff come through that is going to be more sort of mid-market. We're also looking at investors, slightly off topic, but we're sort of also looking at investors now at for-profit affordable housing. It's a contentious issue in many ways because affordable housing has previously, and also the phrase affordable is also a moot point. But leaving that aside for a minute, social housing, affordable housing has always been the sort of domain of local authorities or housing associations. Institutions, particularly, and funds have now set up for-profit housing associations and institutions to deal exactly with that, because in a curious sort of way, affordable housing and social housing is actually regulated in the sense that you know what the increases are going to be every year. So again, it's all about regularization of income. And so the institutions are not just interested in sort of build to rent as a premium product. They're basically interested in residential as a stable income product. And there's a whole range of stable income products out there, of which build to rent is one.
So a huge thank you to Richard and you, Rob, for interviewing Richard, because that was brilliant. There's so much to take from that episode. But the thing is, because Richard is a huge resource when it comes to this subject, we've now got a real good understanding of what build to rent is, but we're actually going to get him back on next week to talk about the future of build to rent. And it's really important that people understand the future of build to rent because it affects us all.
It does. And I'll echo your thanks to Richard because this was only meant to be one episode, but we had such a great conversation. There was so much fascinating stuff in there. We had to expand it to 2. So make sure you listen to next week's episode where we're going to be talking about the future of build to rent, where it's going, and most importantly, what it means for you.
So it's time for a success story. So we love it when you get in touch, whether it's through Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, that's at Property Hub UK, or you leave us a review on iTunes. We love those as well. Thank you. However you do it, we appreciate it. And what we appreciate more is when you tell us about the action that you've taken. And a huge thank you to Luke Spooner, who reached out to us via Instagram. And he said, I just want to say thank you for the amazing content. Rob and Rob aged 20 while at a Property Hub Summit event, and I had 0 properties then. Using the knowledge gained from Rob and Rob and lots of hard work, only 2 years later on, our family now has 23 properties, and I'm on my second buy-to-let personally. I bought my first one aged 21. Thank you for your consistent content. It's always deeply informative and delivered in an easy way. And often comedic too. Keep up the good work, guys. You are smashing it. Well, thank you, Luke. And well done. I mean, that is just truly incredible. Not only have you got yourself going, but moving your whole family on to that level of action is bonkers, really, but also incredibly impressive. I think you absolutely nailed it in what you said, that hard work. You used the term hard work, and that is key. You may be listening to this going, wow, they listened to Rob and Rob and now there's a whole portfolio of properties, but in between all that was a lot of hard work and of course a group of people who were willing to take action. So well done to Luke and well done to your family. So time for Hub Extra, a part of the podcast where we like to bring you more. And this is matched up with our newsletter that goes out every Friday, which again has the aim of just giving you more, the most valuable email in your inbox every Friday. Just sign up to the Property Hub for free to take advantage of that. And Rob, this week you've recommended a book that I read a few years ago and I really enjoyed, but I forgot to recommend. So I'm so glad that you've picked it up and you're now recommending it to everyone because it's a cracker.
Yeah, I'm late to the party on this one. This is Finding Ultra by Rich Roll. Rich has got a very, very popular podcast as well, which, again, late too, I've only just started listening to. But the book tells Rich's story of turning 40, being horribly out of shape, being a recovering alcoholic, and going on to be one of the fittest men in the world. One of the things he talks about in the book is a challenge that he had with a friend to run 5 Ironman triathlons in a week. That's the level of madness we're talking about here. It's a great story. If you enjoyed Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins, which we talked about on the podcast before, you will definitely like this one. So well worth checking out.
So now you know what build to rent is, but what does the future hold? Well, next week we will cover that because it is so important that you understand that this trend and where it's going and what's happening because it will affect us all as property investors. Remember to keep in touch via all the socials at Property Hub UK. You've got tons of resource on the Property Hub as well that you can be taking advantage of until then. And if that wasn't enough, you've got Ask Rob and Rob back on Tuesday. So enjoy it all. Take care, everyone. Have fun. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.